Good morning and thanks for staying tuned. Welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Our headlines. Finland plans to submit application to join NATO. That's according to its president. European Union calls Russia the most direct threat to world order. And Siemens is to exit the Russian market. All eyes are now on Finland as both its president and prime minister are set to lay out their positions on whether or not the country should join NATO. According to a statement released just a couple of minutes ago, an important discussion on Finland's possible membership of NATO has taken place, and time has been needed to let Parliament and the whole society establish their stance on the matter. Time has also been needed for close international contacts with NATO and its Western countries, as well as with Sweden. We have wanted to give the discussion the space it required. Now that the moment of decision-making is near, we state our equal views also for the information to parliamentary groups and parties. The Nordic country has had a long history of neutrality, but as the war in Ukraine rages, public support for joining NATO has soared to a record heights. Finland's decision is expected to draw in neighboring Sweden, which is also expecting to make a decision on joining the NATO alliance in the coming days. Sweden's ruling Social Democrats will decide on Sunday whether to overturn decades of opposition to NATO membership, a move that would most certainly lead to Sweden asking to join the 30-nation alliance. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has sparked an urgent rethink of security policy in both Sweden and Finland, both varying that bilateral agreements are no substitute for Article 5 of NATO's charter, which guarantees that an attack on one member state would be considered an attack on all.
Sweden's case, having the alliance on its side formally being covered under the Article 5 NATO clause is something important given the state of European security at the moment. But Sweden and Finland are sophisticated militaries. They are small for sure, but they have indigenous defense industries. They can operate across all domains of conflict. They can operate at the high end of conflict. You know, Sweden has advanced jet fighters that they fly on a routine basis. They're very good in the maritime domain as well. So there's real capability that Sweden and Finland could bring to the alliance. Prospects of horizontal escalation, I think, in the short term are not something that Sweden or Finland necessarily have to worry about. But you can never know. There are other ways to kind of cause chaos in a country, whether it's through the hybrid domain, through the cyber domain. I think they're trying to keep this as low key as possible and trying to compress the window as much as possible. So the ability for the Russians to cause any chaos is as limited as it can be.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he has agreed new deals with Sweden and Finland to bolster European security, pledging to support both countries' armed forces should they come under attack. Mr. Johnson signed the new declarations described by Britain as a step change in defense and security cooperation during visits to both Sweden and Finland. Britain says the new arrangements would intensify the intelligence sharing and accelerate joint military training exercises and deployments. The British Prime Minister said the nature of any assistance will depend on the request of the other party, but he said NATO was a defensive alliance. Sweden has also received assurances of support from the US and Germany.
NATO is a defensive alliance. NATO poses no threat to anyone. It is there for the purposes of mutual defense. So the security declaration, the solemn declaration we've signed today, ensures that our two nations can intensify our partnership and take it to unparalleled heights, both latitudinal and metaphorical. From the high north to the Baltics and beyond, our armed forces will train, operate and exercise together, marrying our defense and security capabilities and formalizing a pledge that we will always come to one another's aid.
This cooperation, it increases enormously Finnish security. For us, joining NATO would be not against anybody. We would like to maximize our security in way or another while thinking membership in NATO. But it is not a zero-sum game. If Finland increases its security, it's not away from anybody else. It's very valuable to have you here, and we have had a very good conversation.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, speaking to French University Sciences Pound, said the war with Russia would have been prevented if his country had been a member of NATO beforehand. The Russian President Vladimir Putin had repeatedly said the risk of seeing Ukraine become a member of NATO warranted the invasion of its neighbor that started more than 2 months ago. Zelensky said he wanted to restore the country's territory before an end of the war with Russia could be envisioned, adding that he was still willing to dialogue with Moscow. The war will only end for the Ukrainian nation when we get back what is ours, and that's according to President Zelensky. And the United States does not believe that Russian President Vladimir Putin wants to militarily take on the NATO alliance, and that's according to U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, who's speaking as Moscow struggles to achieve its goals in Ukraine 3 months into the invasion. According to Mr. Austin, as you look at Putin's calculus, my view, and I'm sure the chairman has his own view, but my view is that Russia doesn't want to take on the military alliance called NATO.
But as you look at Putin's calculus, my view, and I'm sure the chairman has his own view, but my view is that Russia doesn't want to take on the NATO alliance. He's got, a number of troops arrayed in the region right now on the Ukrainian border, and he had some in Belarus and still has some there. But there are 1.9 million forces in NATO. NATO has the most advanced capabilities of any alliance in the world in terms of aircraft, ships, types of weaponry that the ground forces use. So this is a fight that he really doesn't want to have, and that would very quickly escalate into another type of competition that no one wants to see.
And Russia is the, quote, most direct threat to the international order because of its, quote, barbaric war in Ukraine. And that's according to European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Speaking after talks in Tokyo with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, she also mentioned Moscow's warring pact with China. European Council President Charles Michel also took part in the summit in the Japanese capital. Meanwhile, Mr. Kishida said Russia's invasion of Ukraine is not just a matter for Europe, but it shakes the core of the international order, including Asia, and that this must not be tolerated. Let's talk now to Nnamdi Okeke, who is an intelligence and security expert. He is the faculty head of the ISOSEC, who joins us virtually. Good morning to you, Mr. Okeke. Thank you for your time this morning.
Good morning. Good morning, and thank you for your time too.
Let's start off with this breaking news out of Finland that all indications are that it is going to apply to join NATO. Of course, that doesn't mean it automatically becomes a NATO member, but it is going to apply, and that might as well pull in Sweden almost immediately. What do you make of this?
Well, it's a PSYOPs-driven war. And what that means is that Finland is currently left with no option as an alliance to the United States to make sure that the United States' enemies are its enemies. This is not something you choose. And remember that joining an alliance like this is not a function of the people's vote. It's simply all you need to do is to engage the heads and let them see the threats that is up against them. In fact, the latest propaganda tool that is used is Russia will pound you just like they pounded Mariupol. So what that means is that they will pound you to submission if you do not agree to be part of what they are doing. So automatically, your greatest ally for now will be NATO, which most people around you have already joined. So They've started by signing an agreement with the UK and all of that. That's just a step in that direction. So eventually, you are looking at a potential NATO state. Ordinarily, you expect that they should be neutral at this point, which even makes negotiations a lot more easier. But the threat is real. I mean, if you look at all that is happening around them, and of course, the US being in control of these narratives, you can be sure that all they are seeing is the possibilities of the war. And so they have no other choice, because the enemy of your ally is your enemy automatically. You can't see them going back to Putin now to ask, what are you about to do? Are we safe or are we not safe? So they have no options, of course, than to join this alliance. They definitely.
But it is a big, it appears to be a huge gamble, because earlier on, a couple of weeks ago, Russia had indicated that it was watching, and that if either Sweden or Finland attempted to join NATO, what would happen would be worse than what is happening in Ukraine at the moment. So this is a gamble. And even though NATO is saying, you heard Secretary Austin, the US Secretary of Defense there, saying that he didn't think that Russia was prepared to take on NATO. Some of the people I've spoken to had said, yeah, most people didn't think that Russia was going to invade Ukraine. So basing your assumptions on something that you don't think would happen is very, very risky, especially at this point.
Let me quickly respond to that. For people who didn't think that Russia was going to invade Ukraine, I think they missed it at some point. The temperament of Putin can be predicted. You'll always know when he's ready to escalate and why he's escalating. I mean, this is something that you have studied over the years. This is all a narrative by the United States. They originally knew since 1997 that the joining of the NATO states by other bodies that are borderlines to Russia would suddenly bring about this particular offensive that they are looking at. They also knew that it will start from Ukraine. These were very clear things. The US has predicted this over. They knew that this invasion was going to come. But the case with Finland and Sweden is a bit different, because now Russia attempting any of these countries will be looking at a fight where he will stand 1 against 15. You know, I mean, if you look at NATO strength, it's almost like 1 against 15. They already have a major superpower, which is the US, leading this, and that's like 1/4 of the entire world's GDP. These are not things you want to gamble into, right? So I know there will be a backup at that level, because, I mean, the entire NATO will be on that matter. So Ukraine was already predicted. Ukraine was a bait. In fact, Russia, if you ask me, Russia is exactly where the US wanted them to be, both in terms of policy, in terms of strategy and plans. They saw this coming and they were ready for this indirect one. That's why they are funding so much. How much can you love a country that you give as much as 40 billion to fund this war? You know, this is exactly what, no matter what, to the detriment of the taxpayers. So they saw this coming already. It's not, and they saw it as a means to alliance. And bear in mind that everything that Kremlin has been doing up till now in Russia has been counterproductive. Their threats have been counterproductive. Everything they've been moving has always made counterproductive efforts. And that's why they are still where they are now. It's almost looking like they can't pull back, right?
Can I then ask you, because following the narrative as you've given it, the thing is that even if, as you say, Russia will think twice before taking on NATO, which is the position of the US anyway, but then NATO has also been very, very reluctant to take on Russia, particularly in Ukraine. In spite of President Zelensky's continued pleading for the enforcement of a no-fly zone, for boots on the ground from some of these countries to assist his own military, they have been resolute in saying, we'll give you money, we'll give you weapons, but we are not going to get involved. And behind that is the specter of World War III. Everybody's saying, you know, when it gets to that stage, then we might be looking at a much broader war that would draw in all kinds of people, including Russia's pact with China. Do you see all of this unraveling once it gets to that stage?
Okay, so let's start by looking at what the original narrative is. NATO by design will not accept Ukraine because the narrative originally is expected to put Russia in its place. And the only way to push Russia in its place is to ensure that you have what is happening now take place. See, as far back as 10 years, we have people in war rooms that have designed strategies around today and the things you are seeing today. And the whole idea is to actually put Russia where it is. Russia is exactly where the US needed it to be now. It's not about the Third World War. This is an indirect war between the entire West and Russia itself. So they knew that by temperament, he will respond like this, and they knew to what extent he will go, irrespective of the amount of warheads he has. And already, they are showing a lack of strategy and strength in conquering the little NATO. Little Ukraine, talk more of engaging the entire NATO. So he may have the will, but you can clearly predict that he won't want to take on the entire group. Secondly, please bear in mind that for now, the war that is going on is not even a Ukraine war. When you say there are no boots on the ground, the strategy could also mean that another country is fighting for you. So what it means is that Russia is actually fighting NATO indirectly, and they are testing to see what it will look like. And that also informs the decision they will make. As a country, they start by escalating before they de-escalate. So that's exactly what they are trying to do. They are going to capture a few places. They will have to celebrate that win and just go back. That's exactly where this war will end. It's going to be a long one, but it's not something that's going to be engaging the entire world. I can assure you of this.
What about China? Where do you see China in all of this? Because China is a completely different ball game in all of this. If it comes to military strength and military prowess, I don't think, as a strategist, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but China is not on the same scale as Russia. China has far more weaponry, far more tools that it can deploy, even against NATO. So if by some chance China is drawn in, then we might have a problem.
Okay, so let's look at a few things about China's relationship with Russia. If you look at the alliance between China and Russia, on paper, it looks like they are brothers. In reality, China has more ties with the United States and its allies than Russia, especially in business. China is looking at growing its economy. They are long-term planners. War is not part of the things they're interested in. They are usually very indifferent. Of course, they will play a key role in propaganda, which is a strategy of people that align with Russia. But thinking of going into a war currently is not one of the things China is looking at. They're looking at growing their economy. They're looking at competing with the United States, which is about twice their GDP. So it's going to be a long-term coming thing. And they are not so close to Russia enough to engage in a battle. That's not what they're looking at for now. They're looking at expanding the economy. They're looking at world dominance. They're looking at becoming another United States because they have the population. They are second largest in GDP. War is not part of. They won't go into war because of Russia. They'll go into war because of several other things, but not Russia. So let's get this right already. So for now, they are playing the role of the negotiators, those with the neutral stand, and backing Russia on the side with propaganda. And that's where it ends. If they're very interested in Russia, by now they'll be sending in a whole list of men or a whole list of weaponry. That alliance is not that strong, I can assure you.
All right, then. Thank you so very much, Mr. Nnamdi Okeke, for your perspective this morning on the show. It's been quite enlightening listening to you. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
We'll take a break, but when we return, we will take a look at some of the other stories coming up on the program, particularly the issue of food supply concerns as the UN chief visits Austria. Please stay on. Thanks for staying tuned and welcome back. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has welcomed his British counterpart to the Pentagon, where they discussed Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine. According to Mr. Austin, few countries have stepped up with security assistance to Ukraine the way the United Kingdom has. He told the British Defense Secretary Ben Wallace at the start of their meeting that the two countries would continue to partnership in terms of leadership with assistance to Ukraine.
Now, Russia's invasion has entered a different phase that is no less dangerous. But we will continue to work together with unity and resolve to rush Ukraine what it needs to defend itself now and in the future. Mr. Secretary, I'd like to tell you that, in my view, few countries have stepped up with security assistance to Ukraine the way that the UK has. We continue to work together to support Ukraine and strengthen our own close partners.
Words and deeds matter. deeds matter more often than words. And it has been absolutely clear throughout all of this Ukraine war with Russia's illegal invasion that the United States demonstrate that by their deeds they stand by their allies. There are many people who talk, but throughout all of this, and way before, back to 2015, the United States was in Ukraine, by Ukraine, both in training and support and in military aid in a way that no other country was. And because of that, Ukraine is stronger today and able to hold out in that defense against a very aggressive Russia. So on behalf of the United Kingdom, I want to thank you for that leadership. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
This next video we're about to show you is the moment a massive explosion was seen at the Azovstal steelworks in the Ukrainian city of Mariupol as black smoke rises above the visibly destroyed plant. Ukrainian officials said Russia was pressing on with its assault on the Azovstal plant after capturing the rest of the city. The leader of Ukraine's Russian-backed breakaway Donetsk People's Republic said there were no civilians left at the steel plant in the occupied city. Ukraine had said that Russian forces were bombarding the steelworks, where a local official said at least 100 civilians were still holed up. Scores of wounded fighters are also believed to be in the bombed-out plant. Let's talk now to Juliet Otto, who's a clinical psychologist and joins us virtually. Good morning to you. Thank you for your time. Welcome to the program.
Good morning. Good morning, Nigerians.
The key point in all of this, as the last story I read just indicates, is that quite a lot is going on behind the pictures and the videos that we see on an everyday basis out of this war situation. There are so many displaced people, there are so many refugees, prisoners of war, people traumatized by all kinds of incidents that have happened in the course of this conflict. What can you tell us about how people like that actually feel when things like this happen to them? For example, you take people who are at home and get bombed out of the blue without warning.
It's really pathetic for one to look at this Russia invasion, which took place on the 24th of February this year. It's actually a traumatic experience, mainly for those who survived, because those who were dead, they wouldn't know what actually happened. But those who survived and families that are alive, they tend to feel the traumatic experiences because some of them, they've lost their loved ones, they've lost properties, and for mental health has to do with the way people think. It's when there is a problem with someone's mental health, that means there's a distortion on the person's thought pattern, the way the person feels and the way the person behaves. So this is a vicious cycle. It's a cycle of its own that they begin to think, where did we get it wrong? And before you know it, some of them begin to feel somatization. That's the feeling of it. Then they begin to act out some of those abnormal behavior. Some of them begin to have anxiety disorder. Some of them begin to have flashback, which is as a result of PTSD, which may have resulted from the experiences they've had in a couple of months, weeks. And for some of them, it may just be the shock of the moment, and some of them will go into acute depression, severe depression, which will be reoccurring, and they'll be having nightmares of all of the happenings because they never envisaged something like this was going to happen. But if they were privy to all of this, I'm sure some of them would have taken precautionary measures. Maybe they'd have left the place, but because they're already involved in that or they're already in that scene, it's definitely going to affect their mental health. It's important that it be noted that it's going to definitely affect their mental health.
Now, we're talking about, let's say, fully grown adults here, but then also children. I mean, some of the visuals will show even babies, small children, teenagers with backpacks, some of them crying and all of that, and just bewildered by what is happening, having to move in such dire circumstances. Is their own situation different in the sense that perhaps their reaction is delayed until later, whereas the adults, you probably are able to see the reaction almost immediately?
For the children, especially those who are adolescents, they will definitely have traumatic experiences. And you see them sometimes they scream from their sleep, they become withdrawn. And because of those experiences, those flashbacks and tend to affect their emotions. So children are not ruled out because especially children who are already between the ages of 7 who understand what is happening, that, oh, I've lost my dad, I can't find my parents, I can't find my siblings, I'm nowhere, hunger, starvations, and all that. They will definitely be affected by the traumatic experience. So none is left. Children are traumatized too.
There were quite a number of Nigerians in Ukraine who had to make, in some instances, fairly dramatic escapes, and they also went through some of these experiences that we have described here. And when they return to Nigeria or they relocate to neighboring countries and settle, there's very little mention. But if you take the ones who returned to Nigeria, for example, there's very little mention of psychological or clinical psychological treatment, counseling or anything like that made for them. Now, and in several months, we are now in the 3rd month of this. Some of them had returned as early as the 2nd or 3rd week. So a lot of time has gone by. What would you say?
For PTSD, okay.
Yes.
For PTSD,
no, please go on.
Within 4 weeks, 1 month.
So what should they be doing now? I mean, is it too late, or is it still possible for them to get that training, counseling and treatment?
Okay, for some persons, it may not be problematic to them because of their resilience. They build resilience over the years. But for some persons that are highly vulnerable, because some persons go through every one of us will go through some traumatic experience, but we've been able to navigate our ways. But for some persons whom these things are problematic to, it's imperative that they seek therapeutic assistance, help now before it escalates the process where they become totally down, that they are unable to function. So for some of them, they may be unable to function. Some of them may begin to have flashback, dreams, and that will begin to alter their daily activities. So it's important that they annex the system of the clinical psychologist or the mental health professional now before it gets too late. Resorting to psychosis and all that, okay?
Yes. Now, people, specialists like you, as we know, in Nigeria are not that many. And therefore, there may be people, there's also the question of access, to be able to access people like you, and even the information that people like you are there to be accessed. Is there anything that you think that the authorities could do to get this information across to those who need these services and to make it possible for them to be able to access people like you, for them to get this information and the treatment?
We are very open to assisting people who had gone through those traumatic experience, and we actually few in the country. But I believe with the help of other mental health assistants, I work with youth, for example, and we run clinics, and we have clinic days for adolescents, clinic days for adults. So if they are interested, or if they think this thing is becoming problematic, because we don't wait until it gets to a point where they are unable to function anymore, and it becomes a total breakdown on them, on their mental health. They can annex our clinic days. At Lutz, we do clinic on our outpatients on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So we are available to them, and our numbers could be shared for them to access us.
As this thing goes on, we will expect to be returning to you from time to time to keep us updated about the progress of all of this. But Juliet, thank you so much for your time this morning, and you have a pleasant day ahead. Juliet Otto is a clinical psychologist. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. Nice day.
The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres says he was deeply concerned about the risk of hunger becoming widespread because of the impact of the war in Ukraine on global food security. Mr. Guterres is on an official visit to Austria for meetings with the country's leaders and to chair the Chief Executive's Board that will bring together the heads of the main UN entities from around the world in person.
The Russian invasion of Ukraine is causing massive devastation, destruction, and suffering in the country, triggering the largest displacement in Europe since World War II, and sending shockwaves across the region and the world. This senseless war must stop. It has inflamed the three-dimensional crisis, food, energy, and finance, with devastating impacts on the most vulnerable people, countries, and economies. As dramatic as it is, the war in Ukraine cannot make us forget that climate change is an existential threat to us all, to the whole world. We can see the impacts everywhere, including right here in the Austrian Alps, where glaciers are retreating and ice and snow bridges disappearing. I've just returned from the Sahel, where the toxic combination of runaway climate change, an uneven recovery from COVID-19, and now the radiating impacts of the war in Ukraine are pummeling countries across the continent.
German industrial conglomerate Siemens has announced that it would pull out of the Russian market as a result of the war in Ukraine. That's according to a statement posted on the firm's Twitter account. The company had earlier announced in March that it would halt all new business and international deliveries to Russia, but would continue local service and maintenance-related activities while ensuring strict adherence to sanctions. But the firm said in a press statement this morning that comprehensive international sanctions impact the company's business activities in Russia, particularly rail service and maintenance. Siemens has had dealings with Russia since the 1850s, and until recently was a supporter of greater economic rapprochement between Germany and Russia. Let's talk to Ini John McQuire, as always, to help us piece all of this together. Morning, Ini.
Good morning.
Let's start off with this sanctions, which Moscow has imposed on its own, because sometimes when people talk about sanctions, we always assume it's the West sanctioning Russia, but Russia has also imposed sanctions on the owner of the Polish part of the pipeline that was supposed to be redirected 2 days ago. What can you tell us about that?
So a lot is happening around gas pipelines at this time. First of all, in 3 days' time, that's the 15th, the EU new sanctions on gas and all is supposed to take place. So I guess that's why Moscow is going ahead of European to start all of this. So they've sanctioned 30 firms in European countries that deal in gas. Now, what has happened in this case is there's the Gazprom. You know, it's a pipeline that supplies gas to those European countries. It goes through Poland. There's a part that goes through Poland, owned by the Polish government. There's a part that goes through Germany. It's called Germania, Gazprom Germania. It goes through Germany, to other
European states.
European states. So last month, Gazprom wakes up and say, we don't want our share in this Gazprom Germania anymore. So you guys own it. Germany, you own it. We don't want to be a part of it anymore. I mean, it didn't make the news at that time because nobody thought what was going on or what was going to be the implication of that. So now we know why they did that last month. So now they have decided to sanction 30 firms in Europe that deal in gas, and these companies are part of them. So what that means that, President Putin has said the sanctioned countries or the firms must not have any export, no interaction, no transaction with Russia.
Right.
So what it means, is most likely gas supply through these pipelines. I mean, since it's no longer a Gazprom, it doesn't belong to the Russian government anymore. It now belongs to Germany. And Germany, obviously, is part of the countries that have been listed on the sanction list. So they may not have any
gas. That's it. They have no interaction, and therefore they have no gas.
Exactly. So that's why I started by saying that the 15th of May is when the EU want to start their own embargo, but Russia is going ahead of that to say, well, we don't even want to do business with you in the first place. You're already on our sanction list. And a whole lot of implication here, because Eastern Europe at this time may not get supplies, because this is the routes, the gas routes that, supply is being given to most of these countries. So if there's no supply from the pipeline because Russia has sanctioned these firms, and countries like Switzerland, Italy, they're also affected, France, of course, we know United States will be there, Britain, those countries are there. We know about Bulgaria and Poland have already been affected, so it might get to a point where supply is not, they say at this time that they are still supplying, but it might get to a point where supplies are not sent through this gas route, and then Eastern Europe might feel it first before other parts of Europe.
That also then, of course, has impact. We've been talking about this ever since this war began, which is the issue of oil and gas prices. And therefore, I guess we shouldn't be too surprised that
the
Saudi Aramco has overtaken Apple as the world's most valuable company.
I mean, Apple is being bombarded by supply chain disruption, interest rate, inflation. The Nigerian equities has been doing well. Honestly, even the stockbrokers have not been able to explain why, because every other equities market is not doing well. So even investors in tech stocks are looking for how to get their money out. You know, so Apple, we're not surprised that it's not doing so well. But of course, on the other hand, Saudi Aramco has been making the most of the surge in oil prices, which is why JP Morgan is not very happy with Nigeria. You know,
yes, I heard that. What was that about, actually?
So they delisted Nigeria from emerging economies. So what that means is our stocks, if we're going to go and raise money, which the government intends to do, the government intends to go and get $950 billion real soon, that means that investing in Nigeria has become riskier. And when it becomes riskier, that means that people should be more careful, you know, about putting their money there. And if they're going to put their money there, it's going to cost them more. So if it's riskier, if you have a riskier stock, then you don't want to put your money in that kind of a country. So it's one of the downsides for Nigeria, not having infrastructure in place to make the most of this surge, which is what countries like Saudi Arabia, you know, Saudi Aramco and Algeria have done. So Nigeria going to get that $950 billion at this Eurobond at this time is going to be more expensive.
Yeah, but in terms of how much we're going to have to pay in terms of interest and all of that.
And then, of course, that increases our debt servicing, which already is about 90% or so. And I'm scared. I hope at some point we won't be borrowing money to service debt, because it will be, you know, it will be a very tight circle that will not look good at all.
I can't let you go before talking about one of the headline stories, which is the Siemens, which is that they've also withdrawn. Again, Siemens being a German company, they've pulled out of Russia. We had reported earlier that they said they were not going to pull out, but they were going to stop all new business.
Yes.
But now they've said it doesn't make sense.
You know, there's also investors' sentiments or customer sentiment, and in the West, I think their sentiments are more coordinated. Like I remember a brand in the United States, they slapped a black man and then everybody boycotted it, you know. So those sentiments are more coordinated in the West. So even if as a company policy, they decide, oh, we'll just be here, or won't take new businesses, or we'll do skeletal, or do online. And remember the beauty one we talked about earlier.
Yes, indeed.
You know, when you get a lot of, you know, hits on your head from your investors and all that, you may just have to do what they want you to say. And also, about the pipeline, you know, Kyiv, they have some of those pipelines passing through.
Yes.
They've put off their own pipeline. You know, so...
Yeah, because, well, they actually said they were going to try to redirect. And at that time, I was asking Laddie, what exactly does that mean? They're going to shut it off, really.
They shut it off. You know, I mean, we didn't really think they would do that because European countries are their friends, you know. But at this point, I guess the excuse they have, oh, it's because of the invasion of Russia. It didn't start today. It's months old.
Yes, and at the very start, that didn't happen. So there's a mixture of the economics as well as the politics.
Yes, I guess just take care of yourself first and think about others next.
Next, yes. Always self first. Thank you, Ini.
Thank you for
so much
me.
to unpack. We'll have Business Morning immediately after this show, and then Business Incorporated later in the day, where all the details of this and other breaking stories on the business desk will come. After the break, international acts are gearing up for the second semi-final of the Eurovision Song Contest ahead of the grand finale on Saturday. Please stay on with us. Welcome back. Russia's foreign minister says the country has enough buyers for its oil and gas outside of Western countries as EU countries try to reduce their reliance on Russian energy. Sergei Lavrov said, quote, "Let the West pay more than it used to pay to the Russian Federation and let it explain to its population why they should become poorer." Lavrov was speaking at a news conference after talks with his counterpart in Muscat, Oman. This is as the governor of Kharkiv region said attacks are intensifying, particularly in residential areas, and the United Nations has reported that the civilian death toll in Ukraine is thousands higher than the official figure of 3,381.
Some 14,000 Ukrainians are thought to be currently in Georgia, but many of them from southeast Ukraine and the city of Mariupol. A once bustling industrial port with a pre-war population of 400,000, Mariupol has experienced heavy bombardment since the early days of the conflict, with civilians suffering shortages of drinking water and food. The Kremlin and Russia's Emergency Situations Ministry has said it's offering humanitarian aid to those wanting to leave Mariupol. Russian authorities offered them emergency accommodation, food, temporary immigration documents, a 10,000 ruble grant, and onward travel to a new home in Russia, further away from the border, according to Russian officials and accounts from refugees. Meanwhile, at the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol, and after evacuation of civilians, fierce fighting and bombings resumed. In an exclusive video by reporter Dmitry Maslak, who entered the steel plant from the northwest side, it shows continued explosions at the site. Judging from the map of the Azovstal steel plant, Maslak said the shelling mainly targeted several workshops and the plant, with airstrikes focusing on areas near the two chimneys. And to a hospital in the small Ukrainian town of Bakhmut. It was never intended to receive queues of ambulances bringing the wounded and traumatized from the front line of Europe's biggest battlefield. Nor did the volunteer paramedics expect 4 months ago to be shuttling back and forth to the front line of a brutal tank battle with an earshot of rockets and shelling.
I haven't seen so much human tragedy before, and these are like absolutely unnecessary sufferings. I understand there's a war, and everybody says, well, you know, there will be casualties, but okay, which is appalling in a way. But when, like, you know, Russian sniper just kills a mother of the family who are going to cross the bridge, like to Irpin, well, there's no justification to that.
The hospital's main job now is to stabilize the injured from the battle zone around the towns of Popasna and the Luhansk region so they can be moved on to bigger hospitals in western Ukraine, farther from the main battle. Ukraine's state gas grid operator Getsu has said that it will stop the transit of Russian gas via the Sokhranovka route starting Wednesday due to force majeure affecting the delivery of a third of the fuel from Russia to Europe through Ukraine. Getsu said in a statement that it's not able to operate the compressor station at the Novopskov, which is located in northern Luhansk, as Ukraine has lost control of the area.
A new brief today by the International Labour Organization reports that an estimated 4.8 million jobs have been lost in Ukraine since the start of the Russian aggression. The study estimates that if hostilities were to escalate, employment losses would increase to 7 million. However, if the fighting was to cease immediately, a rapid recovery would be possible with the return of 3.4 million jobs. This would reduce employment losses to 8.9%. According to the brief, the impact of the Ukraine crisis on the world of work, initial assessments, that's the title, of the more than 5.23 million refugees who have fled to neighboring countries, approximately 2.75 million are of working age. Of this, 43.5% or 1.2 million were previously working or have lost or left their jobs. The aggression in Ukraine has created a shock for the global economy as well, further complicating the recovery from the COVID-19 crisis. This is likely to affect growth in employment and real wages and put additional pressure on social protection systems.
The real solution, I would say there are four main takeaways. First of all, the crisis has had a major impact on jobs. almost 5 million jobs were lost. According to estimates from the Ukrainian Employers Organization, up to 50% of the enterprises are either out of operation or really seriously limited in their operation. That's number one. Number two, we have seen the biggest movement of refugees since the Second World War. According to our figures, or the figures from UNHCR, as of end of April, we have seen about more than 1/4 of the entire population in the Ukraine moving. So it's more than 12 people. The latest estimates even say it's 14 million people. More than 7 are internally displaced people, so where the ILO is working in the country to accommodate their interests. And 5.3 million have actually gone to neighboring countries, mostly to the European Union, which very generously offered a temporary protection status, which is what we have in our recommendations, so that's what we can only wish for. And to other neighboring countries, Moldova, for instance, is not in the European Union. It's really very much hit by this development, so there we need assistance to deliver assistance. We have a national coordinator there. And the third message is that the Central Asian countries are also very much concerned because they're very much dependent on migrant workers sending back remittances. And we know if there's a labor market problem in Russia, the first to suffer from it will be the migrant workers. And finally, there's obviously a global impact, a massive global impact through various channels, in particular the rising energy and food prices, which will have a negative impact on employment, in particular in the low and middle developed countries. The statement of the director.
Let's take a look at the sports stories. Ukrainian tennis star Elina Svitolina has confirmed that she will skip this year's French Open, saying the Russian invasion of her country has been draining. The former world number 3 says she will use her time off to focus on her mental health and to help Ukrainian people who are in need.
The past 2 months haven't been easy for me. Been lots of things was happening, and right now I just want to settle down with everything. I want to find peace within myself, and when the war is still happening, for me it's very tough to do that. I'm very worried for my family. Right now I spend much more time with my parents, with my brother. I wish that one day I just can go back to Ukraine and feel safe there. Right now, just to take my time, I do a lot with my foundation. I travel a lot for fundraising events, meet and greet. Right now, my focus is my family, foundation. Try to do what is possible for people who are in need right now.
FIFA President Gianni Infantino says football cannot solve all the problems of the world while appealing for an end to the war in Ukraine. Mr. Infantino made his latest plea at the 46th UEFA Congress in Vienna, where he called on all the powers that be to do everything possible to restore peace.
Football cannot solve war. We are, in Europe, confronted with a situation of war, something we didn't know. I started to know situations of war when I became FIFA president. I was not aware of what it means, because unfortunately and sadly in the world there are different terrible conflicts. Football cannot solve them, but football can contribute, can help, can try, can push, can call. And that's what, of course, I'm doing here, what I did at the last FIFA Congress as well. Just to repeat with force, with conviction, our plea, the plea of football, to all those who have some sort of decision-making power in this world, to work tirelessly, to make all efforts possible for peace to be restored.
And finally, Eurovision Song Contest hopefuls including favorites Ukraine, took to the stage for a dress rehearsal for the first semi-finals of the contest. 10 acts are competing for a spot in the grand finale on Saturday, May the 14th, with only 10 set to make it through. Ukraine's act, Kalush Orchestra, took to the stage with lead singer Ole Pisyuk in his now iconic pink bucket hat. The folk rap group, who had to receive special dispensation to leave the country during the war, are favorites to win with odds of 8-11, according to the betting aggregate site OddChecker. The 10 successful participants will be joined by another set of winners from the second semi-final that will be later on today, and the big 5 acts will automatically qualify: the United Kingdom, Germany, France, Spain, and last year's winners and hosts, Italy. And that's it on Russian invasion this morning. Thanks for being with us. I'm Ladi Akiridulwale. There's an update at 5 o'clock. We watch out for that, and the show is back tomorrow at 9. But for now, do have a great day ahead. Bye.